They say there are books that teach you how to rule men, and books that teach you how to command armies. But there is a third kind of book, rarer, darker, and far more dangerous. Books that promise something even emperors secretly crave. Power without witnesses, victory without blood, control without explanation. And this is where the story of the Black Pullet begins. Not on a shelf, not in a library, but in fear. Because legends do not agree on who wrote it, or where it truly came from. Only on one thing, that those who read it believed they were no longer alone in the room, and that one of the most powerful men in history, Napoleon Bonaparte, did not treat this book as a curiosity, but as a risk, a temptation, and possibly a curse. And before you dismiss this as superstition, ask yourself this: why would a man who conquered nations hesitate before a book? Why would an emperor who trusted cannons and cavalry keep silent about a small manuscript whispering promises of invisible forces? And why does this book, centuries later, still refuse to be spoken of calmly, as if its true power is not what it teaches, but what it awakens in the reader? The Black Pullet does not introduce itself like an ordinary book. It does not begin with history or explanation. It begins with authority, with symbols, seals, and instructions that assume obedience, as if the reader has already agreed to something they do not yet understand. And according to the legend, this book was discovered during the French campaign in Egypt, hidden among ruins older than empires, where names were carved not to be read aloud, and rituals were recorded not to be questioned. The book spoke of talismans that could bend fate, of spirits bound not by faith, but by knowledge, and of power that did not require prayer, only precision. And this is where Napoleon enters the story, not as a conqueror, but as a listener. Because the rumor was never that he practiced the rituals openly, but that he studied them, weighed them, measured them like weapons, wondering not if they were moral, but if they worked. And those close to him later claimed that during the Egyptian campaign, his confidence shifted. Not the confidence of a general, but the calm of someone who believes the outcome has already been decided, as if victory were no longer negotiated on the battlefield, but somewhere else, somewhere unseen. And the Black Pullet fed that belief, page after page, with instructions that never begged, never explained consequences, and never promised safety. Only results. And this is the detail that terrified readers long after Napoleon. Because unlike religious texts that offer salvation, or manuals that offer control, this book offers power, with no witness, no judge, and no guarantee that the price will be paid immediately, only that it will be paid eventually. And if Napoleon feared this book, it was not because he doubted it, but because he suspected it might be telling the truth. The rituals described in the book were never written as invitations. They were written as commands, cold, exact, almost indifferent to whether the reader believed in them or not. Circles drawn not for protection, but for containment. Names not to be worshipped, but to be summoned. And talismans designed not to bless the wearer, but to bend circumstances around them. And this is where the tone of the Black Pullet becomes deeply unsettling, because it never threatens punishment. It never warns of hell. It simply assumes compliance, as if the universe itself were a mechanism waiting for the correct sequence of actions. And according to later accounts, whispered among officers and scholars, Napoleon did not laugh at these passages. He read them the way an engineer reads blueprints, slowly, repeatedly, tracing symbols with his eyes, as if memorizing a map that led somewhere no army could march. And what disturbed those who knew him best was not that he believed in spirits, but that he entertained the possibility
that belief was unnecessary, that power could be accessed mechanically, without faith, without emotion, only through knowledge. And this idea alone was enough to make the book dangerous, because it suggested that domination did not come from God or destiny, but from understanding hidden rules. And the more Napoleon rose, the more the book's promise seemed plausible. Victories stacked upon victories, coincidences began to look like confirmations, and silence followed success, because no one announces when they are testing something forbidden. They wait to see if it works. And the black pullet waited with him, patient, unreadable, never celebrating triumph, never reacting to failure, as if it were observing rather than guiding. And this is the moment where fear begins to grow, because power that does not celebrate you will not mourn you either.
Every forbidden book hides its true threat not in what it gives, but in what it refuses to explain. And the black pullet never clearly states the price. It only hints at it, scattered across lines about balance, obedience, and unseen witnesses. And this ambiguity is precisely what makes it unbearable. Because humans can accept sacrifice when it is named, but they panic when the debt is undefined. And historians later noted a shift, not in Napoleon's ambition, but in his restlessness. The victories continued, yet the certainty began to fracture, as if the mechanism he believed he had unlocked no longer responded with the same precision. And here the legend turns darker, because some say this was the moment he distanced himself from the book, not burning it, not denouncing it, but placing it away, as one would distance themselves from a loaded weapon that might fire on its own. And this is the final cruelty of the black pullet. It does not chase you when you abandon it. It waits. It allows you to believe you are free, while reminding you through silence that something has already been agreed upon. And whether Napoleon truly feared the book or merely respected it no longer matters, because the idea survived him. The idea that absolute power can be borrowed, but never owned. And that some books do not need to be read to completion to change the course of a life. They only need to be opened once. After Egypt, after the whispers, after the quiet decision to set the book aside, something subtle changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but in the way certainty thinned. Because power borrowed from something unseen does not disappear all at once. It erodes, slowly, deliberately, like sand wearing down stone. And Napoleon's empire began to show cracks, not where enemies struck, but where confidence once stood unchallenged. Campaigns that should have ended cleanly stretched longer than planned. Alliances behaved unpredictably. Weather turned at the wrong moments. And none of these were catastrophic alone, but together they formed a pattern that could not be commanded. And this is where the legend tightens its grip, because the black pullet never promised permanence. It promised advantage. And advantage is temporary by nature, especially when its source is never named. And those who believe the story insist that Napoleon's greatest fear was not defeat, but the realization that whatever force he may have tested no longer responded, as if the mechanism had completed its function and moved on, leaving him with the illusion of control and the weight of consequence. And here lies the cruel irony. Because abandoning the book did not undo its influence. It only removed the illusion that he was still negotiating with it. And from that moment forward, every loss felt heavier. Not because it was unexpected, but because it felt accounted for. As if something unseen were balancing a ledger that had been left open too long. The reason the black pullet remains forbidden is not because it teaches evil, but because it teaches indifference. It does not care who reads it, why they seek power, or what they intend to do with it. It offers no moral framework,
no divine authority, only a set of instructions that assume the reader is willing to accept whatever follows. And this is why the book survives not as a manual, but as a warning, whispered instead of explained, hinted at instead of displayed, because the most dangerous idea it contains is not that spirits can be summoned, but that power can be accessed without permission, without belief, and without witnesses. And if that idea were ever treated casually, it would no longer belong to emperors or conquerors, but to anyone desperate enough to try. And this is why Napoleon's shadow still clings to the book, not as proof that it works, but as evidence that even the strongest minds hesitate when confronted with power that does not ask to be understood. And perhaps that is the final truth of the Black Pullet, that some books are not meant to be read to gain knowledge, but to test restraint, and that the real fear is not what the book can do to the world, but what it invites the reader to do to themselves once they believe that no one is watching.